everybody, and welcome back to Environmental Science 101. Here we do environmental engineering, which is cool and practical, and you'll relate to it, I promise. Okay, so first we introduce it, what it is. We'll talk about how it has different modes, applications across different domains in life, including things like waste management, recycling, water treatment, air pollution. Awesome. We will look at the history of environmental engineering, especially in the American Southwest, where we are, and we'll look at case studies and bring it all home. Cool. All right, what are our sections on this? So first one is going to be waste management. We do water and air. We do remediation and restoration. And then finally, we talk about environmental engineering in Arizona, which is kind of misleading because we talk about environmental engineering in Arizona for all of them. They all kind of hit home for this one. Okay, so first is going to be waste management. Not something that we love to think about, but important. Okay. So before we get to waste management specifically, we have to talk about engineering. So what is engineering? I have a technical definition, I guess, if you want it, but basically engineers make stuff work, right? So an architect, right, designs the building, draws up the blueprints, but it's the job of the engineer to go in and, check the math and make sure that the building actually really finally holds up and doesn't fall down, and then they work with construction to make that happen, right? Engineering is about making stuff work. There are a lot of types of this, right? So electrical engineering might be putting together computers, circuits. Civil engineers will build things like roads, bridges. Chemical engineering is more along the lines of like industrial processing and manufacturing. Mechanical engineering is the one that's going to be the closest to what we're doing, right? So making machines, buildings, stuff of that nature. And this is going to kind of include, mechanical and civil kind of include environmental engineering, which is what we're going to look at here. Now, this definition I give you is broad, and we're going to treat it as being really broad, right? So what is environmental engineering? We're trying to solve problems and make stuff work in the domains of what? Waste disposal, treatment, right? Especially hazardous waste, toxic chemicals, heavy metals, radioactive stuff, all the good stuff. Pollution of air, soil, and water. Remediation and restoration, terms that we'll discuss in a bit, but essentially once damage has been done, now what is the question, and then things related to the water supply. Cool. So I am going to ask you to do a thought experiment here, right? And maybe I'll put a pause point. So you can imagine throwing away a napkin into the trash can at home, right? And what happens next, right? So you throw it away into the trash can, and then later you take it out of that trash can and probably put it into some sort of a bigger trash can. Either one that you get from the city, one of those big waste bins that you put out by the street. If you live in an apartment or other community like that, right, you might put it into some sort of community waste bin. And then what? Right. So this is pretty much as far as it goes, and really this is as far as we have to think about it, right? Like, you're not required to figure out where it goes from there, but that's kind of our job here, is to look in the places where people don't really want to look, right? So what happens next, right? That's going to be our topic for waste disposal. Now, the precise answer to this question for those of us here in the Valley is actually going to come later, right? But that puts us in the right mindset. So, it comes to city planning in general, this is the eternal question. It's, where does the stuff go? Either trash or human waste is kind of question number one, right? I mean, you look at how many people live in this area, how many of them are producing waste. It's got to go somewhere, right? Somebody has to tackle these questions. So waste disposal, broadly speaking, is broken into two groups. You got solids and you got liquids. And when I say solids, I mean like trash, right? Municipal solid waste, stuff that we're talking about that you throw away into the dumpster. Liquids is going to include sewage and human waste and this whole other system, which we'll get to in a bit. This also includes disposal of hazardous materials. So in our lives, right, we've thought about, having to take a car battery back to the auto shop or whatever so they can dispose of it, right? The fact that you can't just, take something like vehicle oil, right, and just pour it anywhere you want or throw it away in the trash can, right? Certain things have to be disposed of in a special way. Okay, this also includes that. So municipal solid waste, we can break this one down, I guess, right? So municipal just means like city, like in an urban setting. Like your water supply at home is part of the municipal city water supply, right? So this is city trash, residential trash that we all know and love. Question mark. Okay. Americans produce a lot of trash, right? So when we talked about our footprint, right, about quantifying sustainability, putting it into concrete terms, and this idea of the ecological footprint, right, the amount of land area that is needed to do what? produce the resources and goods that people consume, and take care of their waste. And we didn't really talk about that part of it, right? Taking care of people's waste is part of sustainability, but it's significant, right? And it can be a hard number to change, as we'll see. So rule of thumb on this one. So the average American produces about a ton, about 2,000 pounds of trash per year, evens out to be something like 5 pounds of trash per day. And this is kind of accounting for all sources, right? Not just, like food wrappers that they throw away, because 5 pounds of that would be a lot. But this is also considering things like bulk trash pickup, or somebody goes to landscape their yard and they cut off tree trimmings. All right, all that stuff put together is about a ton per year per American. About 3 times the global average, and not decreasing over time. However, there is some good news on this one. We'll get to the good news in a moment, but first we have a very important question, right? Where does the trash go? And essentially across our entire country, there's always going to be 3 possible answers, and only 3, right? It either goes into the landfill, it gets burned at the incinerator, or it gets recycled. And those are kind of your options. If you're trying to improve things in this sector, you kind of have to work with one of those, right? First of those is landfills, right? Now, we don't need to be concerned with all the details here of how this is constructed. I mostly just included this so that we could get a visual, but for lack of a better way to put it, you dig a hole in the ground and then you put trash in it, and then you bury it, right, and enclose it with some stuff to prevent the trash from spreading or leaking and contaminating stuff, and then you move on and the problem is solved, right? Okay. Well, these are extremely common, all right? This is where the vast majority of trash and stuff that you throw away is going to end up, period. There's about 40 of these in Arizona. I believe there's something on the order of 2,000 plus in the United States as a whole, which seems about right. This is by far the most common way that waste is disposed of, not the other 2, which we might remember: incinerator and recycling. Okay. Special care is taken for things like pharmaceuticals, which, as we mentioned, can leach into the environment and cause all of these terrible effects. E-waste and electronics or other sorts of toxic stuff, right? What is done with it? You essentially carve out a little box, like in the center of the landfill, and you put all this stuff there so that it has an extra layer of protection around it. Depends on the place, right? But that's generally how it's done. Are these sustainable? The answer is absolutely not, but it's not always where the most damage is being done, even though mentally it doesn't sit right with us. So is this sustainable? No. Is it the biggest of all environmental problems? Also, no. And we're going to look at some details to kind of piece that out. Okay, so we don't need to get into the details on all of this unless you feel like it. What I really wanted to show, okay, so this is the amount of waste generated by Americans. Here's 1960, right, and here's 2018. Notice that the trend increases up until about 1990 and then kind of flattens out. Is it getting better? No, but population is going up, right? So since population is going up and the amount of stuff we're putting into landfill isn't going up, then there has to be good news somewhere along the way, even though the problem is not getting better, which is so confusing, but it's the only way to say it, right? These are, so municipal solid waste, aka trash generation rates, right? This is the number per capita, and then this is the total generation, right? We notice that the per capita has largely stalled out, right, since about 1990, right? The total amount has gone up slightly, but is for the most part very stable over the time scale of 20 to 30 years. Why might this be? Broadly speaking, recycling rates have gone up a lot since, I don't know, maybe 1970, when these ideas were first introduced, became more popular. You see a drastic increase in recycling rates depending on where you are. And notice the percentages here, right? So these days, the nationwide average in terms of recycling rate, broadly speaking, and I believe it's recycling rate as like what percentage of mass of stuff thrown away, like in pounds out of the total, not volume or anything else, hovers close to 40%, right? And actually, as we'll see here in Phoenix, we're actually significantly lower than the national average, but getting better over time, right? So what does this say about our overall picture? Trash is staying about the same as an issue. Recycling is broadly getting better, but starting to stall out. So we are doing about the same damage as we did before, despite having more people, which is a win. Okay, so now we've got all that together. Landfills can run into issues. Part of it is that they have giant amounts of fuel and stuff and matter that are all kind of compressed together. And especially when you throw in green stuff, bulk trash, yard, trimmings, and clippings that people throw away, you can get landfill fires. So I don't know if any of y'all specifically knew what was causing this, or if you remember, this was like late 2023, like October-ish of 2023. I remember leaving my apartment on a Tuesday, it was about 4 weeks into the semester, and just smelling like I was smelling burning the entire time, not being able to see a clear reason, not being able to see why, and I was probably a good 20 miles away from the actual site of this. So this is a landfill fire, right? Producing all sorts of nasty, smelly stuff whenever trash is burned. Now, this was contained, nobody was hurt, it was all put together, but if you remember this, you remember what it smelled like and kind of felt like, then you can kind of see the issues with this next idea. And here's where it's located, right? SCC, I want to say, is going to be, what, about right here? Maybe a little bit lower, something like here. Awesome. So we talked about how trash can be burned, right? And at first, as an idea, this can seem amazing, right? This can seem like a really, really good way to solve the problem, right? Is, okay, people are producing all this trash. The trash does serve as fuel, can serve as pretty good fuel for a fire, right? So why not just take all that trash that people produce, we burn it, right, as fuel for a fire, which can generate electricity, which can go back to the town, right? Well, it turns out this doesn't actually work. I mean, first, the amount of electricity produced by this is really not significant, all things considered. Second, it smells bad and it causes air pollution, and it's expensive. That really kind of sums up the problems, right? It contributes so much to air pollution issues, to issues with smell, odor, and smoke, that it's just not worth it. It makes people sick more than it actually ends up helping them, especially considering God knows what all gets burned in there, right? For the most part, these are built, as we can see, in densely populated areas of the United States, right? Especially along the East Coast. Why do these get built there? Because there is literally not a square foot of property in all of Boston that could be used for a landfill. Like, there is zero space to build it. And so that is why they have to burn their trash, because landfills are just not a practical option up there, right? Mostly used in these densely populated areas, lots of issues with smell. You can see how those two in combination are kind of a losing bet, and it's expensive, right? So billions of dollars to build these things that people don't want to live anywhere near is kind of a failed idea. And as far as I'm aware, there's not any of these in the entire country that are like in the process of being constructed new. So it doesn't work. Last one, recycling, is a lot more promising, but complicated and messy, right? So broadly speaking, recycling is kind of not preventing most of the damage. It's like going in after damage has already been done and mending the wound, right? This is like, I don't know, this is like taking the knife out of the person, but not addressing the wound in them and just being like, well, I stopped stabbing you, so you're fine, is essentially what happens with a lot of recycling. Okay. We have our hierarchy of waste management, right? So most effective is prevent and reduce, right? Same thing for, I don't know, car accidents, right? It's better to prevent them than to try to fix the car. It's better to reduce the amount that is consumed in the first place, as opposed to trying to get really, really complicated and fight the laws of matter and energy in order to do these others, right? To recycle or dispose. Issues here are, right, what we need to remember, reducing is better than reusing is better than recycling. It goes in that order. Why? Not everything can be recycled. Changes can be irreversible in terms of the materials themselves. You simply can't go both directions. It takes energy to process the recycling and supply and demand. People don't want to buy crappy recycling, right? If nobody wants the recycled product in the end or can use it, then we start having to go against the forces of the market and the economy, and that's just not going to work for very long or at scale, right? It doesn't end up being a good way to do it. Now, quickly, we can talk about recycling in the global economy, right? United States, developed countries are selling, South Asia, East Asia are buying. A lot of this, though, is misleading. So they claim to buy recycling and then process it and do something good with it. A lot of times it doesn't. It simply ends up being dumped into landfills. So stuff that was promised to the United States or sellers that it was going to be recycled is instead just dumped. Some people get to feel good, others get to sift through trash, which may be better than agricultural jobs, but it's not the way recycling should be. Okay, for the next section, we talk about air and water in detail.